Bob and a few of his co-workers go out to lunch to celebrate Bob's birthday. Bob, Tim, and Susan are sitting together in the booth when the waitress approaches. She hands them their menus and says, "Good afternoon, fellas. Welcome to Ruby Taste Kitchen. Before we get started, might I ask if you're here to celebrate a special occasion?" Susan pipes up, "It's Bob's birthday." "Oh, well, happy birthday. Make sure you save room, because you'll get a free dessert." Tim and Susan smile and nod, but Bob looks a bit confused. He asks her to repeat herself. "Sure thing, happy birthday. Save room and you'll get a free dessert." There's a moment of silence before Bob says, "Vroom, vroom." A 40-year-old nun visits a gynecologist, complaining of discomfort. After some tests, the doctor returns with a puzzled look. "Sister, your results came back. You have crabs." The nun gasps. "That's impossible. I've never been touched." Determined, she rushes to another doctor for a second opinion. More tests, same results. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to say, but you have crabs." Furious, she storms out. "You doctors are quacks. I'm seeing a specialist." At the most renowned gynecologist in town, she explains everything. The doctor nods, runs some tests, and returns with a sigh. "Well, sister, I have good news and bad news. The good news, you don't have crabs. The bad news, your cherry expired, and now you've got fruit flies." Billy Bob and Luther were chatting one afternoon when Billy Bob said, "Buddy, I think it's time for a vacation. But this year, I'm doing things differently. Every time I took your advice, things got a little complicated." "How so?" Luther asked. "Well, 3 years ago, you told me to go to Hawaii. Erline got pregnant. 2 years ago, you said the Bahamas. Erline got pregnant again. Last year, you suggested Tahiti. Guess what? Erline got pregnant again." Luther shook his head and asked, "So what's the plan this year?" Billy Bob grinned. "This time, I'm taking Erline with me." A young and pretty nun visits the gynecologist, looking distressed. "Doctor, I'm really worried. I think I have stamps coming out of my peach." The doctor, puzzled, begins the examination. After a moment, he chuckles and steps back. "Sister, those aren't stamps. Those are banana stickers." A man suspects his wife is cheating, so one day he comes home early. As soon as he steps inside, she meets him at the door, wrapped in a bathrobe, her hair a mess. "Where is he?" he shouts. "Where's the guy you've been sneaking around with?" She gasps. "I don't know what you're talking about." Not convinced, he tears through the house, checking under the bed, inside the closets, even behind the shower curtain. Nothing. Then from the kitchen window, he spots a guy just sitting in a Volkswagen parked outside. His eyes narrow. "Aha! That must be him!" Blinded by rage, he grabs the refrigerator, lifts it with all his strength, and hurls it out the window. The effort is too much. His heart gives out, and he collapses, dead. Up at the pearly gates, St. Peter looks at him and asks, "What are you doing here?" The man sighs. "Well, I knew my wife was cheating, so I came home early, saw the guy in the Volkswagen, threw a fridge at him, and had a heart attack." St. Peter shakes his head. "Yeah, that was a bit much. Off to you go." He pulls a lever, a trapdoor opens, and the guy vanishes. Minutes later, another man arrives at the gates. St. Peter asks, "And what are you doing here?" The guy looks confused. "I don't know. I was just sitting in my Volkswagen, minding my own business, when suddenly, bam! A refrigerator crushes me." St. Peter frowns. "Oh, you poor guy. But still, you were involved in all that mess. Off to you." Pulls the lever. A few minutes pass, and a third guy stumbles up to the gates, dazed. St. Peter sighs. "All right, what's your story?" The guy blinks and says, "Honestly, I have no idea. 1 minute, I'm chilling in a refrigerator. The next, I'm here." A retired gentleman walks into the Social Security office to apply for benefits. The clerk behind the desk asks, "Sir, can I see your driver's license to verify your age?" The man pats his pockets and realizes he left his wallet at home. "Oh no," he sighs. "I'll have to go back and get it." The clerk waves him off. "No need, just unbutton your shirt." Confused but obliging, the man opens his shirt, revealing a chest full of curly silver hair. She nods. "That's proof enough for me." She processes his application on the spot. Excited, the man rushes home to tell his wife. "Honey, you won't believe it. I forgot my ID, but the clerk saw my grey chest hair and approved me right away." His wife smirks. "You should have dropped your pants. You might have qualified for disability too." A married man steps into the confessional and nervously tells the priest, "Father, I almost cheated on my wife." The priest raises an eyebrow. "Almost." "Well, we got undressed, and there was some rubbing, but I stopped before anything more happened." The priest sighs. "Son, rubbing is just as bad as the real thing. You must avoid temptation completely. Say 5 Hail Marys and put $50 in the poor box." The man nods, says his prayers, then strolls over to the poor box. He pauses, reaches into his pocket, and then hesitates before walking away. The priest, watching closely, hurries over. "Hey, I saw that! You didn't put the money in the box!" The man grins. "Well, Father, I rubbed the money on the box, and, as you said, that's the same as putting it in." A man's wife sends him to the store to buy cigarettes, but when he gets there, it's closed. On the way home, he stops at a bar to use the vending machine and ends up chatting with a beautiful woman. One thing leads to another, and before he knows it, he's at her place. Hours later, he looks at the clock. 3 a.m. Panicking, he says, "Oh no, my wife is going to kill me. Do you have any talcum powder?" She hands him some, and he quickly rubs it all over his hands before heading home. As soon as he walks through the door, his wife is waiting. Arms crossed, furious. "Where have you been?" He stammers, "Well, I went to the store, but it was closed. So I stopped at a bar, met this beautiful woman, had a few drinks, and, things got out of hand." She glares at him. "Let me see your hands." She looks at the white powder all over them and shouts, "You liar! You've been bowling again, haven't you?" One day, Billy, Bob, and Doodah went fishing in a small boat. None of them could swim, and they had no life jackets. Doodah suddenly started yelling, "I got one, boys!" as he started trying to reel the fish in. It was way too large for him to get onto the boat, and he fell into the water. The fish had a nice meal that night. Billy and Bob were in shock, but knew they had to tell Mrs. Doodah. Upon arriving at her house, they did rock, paper, scissors on who had to tell her the news. Bob lost. He slowly rang the doorbell, and Mrs. Doodah answered. We do-da-da for fish," Bob stuttered. Then he screamed and ran off. Billy went to go retrieve his friend. Billy had a nice little talk with him and slapped him across the face to get him to just say what happened. Soon the two men returned to Mrs. Doodah's house and rang the doorbell again. She opened the door and looked at the two men and asked, "I've been trying to call Doodah, and he hasn't answered. Is he okay?" Bob took a deep breath and took a step forward with a smile on his face. He sang, "We went fishing. Guess who died, Doodah. He smiled and he said goodbye. We mourn Doodah today. Bob is getting older, and his kids decided to put him in an assisted living facility. Bob at first was reluctant to go there. Bob's wife had died several years earlier, but when his children showed him around the place, he found out that there were 10 women for every man living there. Since Bob had married young in life and didn't really get a chance to sow his wild oats when younger, he decided to give the place a go and see if he could catch up on some fun times with the ladies there. On his first day at the home, he met Sally, a pleasant older woman that informed Bob that on Wednesday nights it was movie night for the residents. She asked Bob if he would go with her to the movie that week. Bob told Sally that he would go with her, but only if she held his buddy during the film. Sally thought about this for a bit and decided, what the heck? She could do that, as she really wanted a date for Wednesday movie night. Everything went well with the date, and the next Tuesday, Sally asked Bob if he would take her to the movie again this week, but Bob said he was sorry he could not, because he was going to the Wednesday night movie with another resident, Jane. Sally was a bit miffed that Bob already had found someone else, and asked Bob, "So what's Jane got that I haven't got?" To which Bob replied, "Parkinson's." Bob left work one Friday evening, but it was payday. So instead of going home, he stayed out the entire weekend partying with his mates and spending his entire wages. When he finally appeared at home on Sunday night, he was confronted by his angry wife and was barraged for nearly 2 hours with a tirade befitting his actions. Finally, his wife stopped the nagging and said to him, "How would you like it if you didn't see me for 2 or 3 days?" He replied, "That would be fine with me." Monday went by and he didn't see his wife. Tuesday and Wednesday came and went with the same results. But on Thursday, the swelling went down just enough that he could see her a little out of the corner of his left eye. "I need to inspect your ranch for illegally grown drugs." The old rancher says, "Okay, but don't go in that field over there." The agent verbally explodes, saying, "Mister, I have the authority of the federal government with me." Reaching into his rear pant pocket and removing his badge, the officer proudly displays it to the farmer. "See this badge? This badge means I am allowed to go wherever I wish, on any land, no questions asked or answered given. Have I made myself clear? Do you understand?" The old rancher nods politely and goes about his chores. Later, the old rancher hears loud screams and spies the agent running for his life, and close behind is the rancher's bull. With every step, the bull is gaining ground on the agent. The agent is clearly terrified. The old rancher immediately throws down his tools, runs to the fence, and yells at the top of his lungs, "Your badge! Show him your badge!" There are 2 old ladies at a park. One is rich while the other one is poor. It was the rich lady's birthday last week. "My husband got me a diamond ring for my birthday," says the rich lady. "That's nice," says the poor lady. "He also got me a Mercedes C-Class," says the rich lady. "That's nice." Says the poor lady, "So what did yours get you?" Asks the rich lady. "A book about anger management." Says the poor lady. "Ha! And I can see it hasn't worked." Says the rich lady. "Oh, it did actually," says the poor lady. "Before I used to say f off, and now I say, that's nice." A woman jumps into a taxi. The taxi driver stares at her, looking her over from top to bottom. The woman is offended and asks the taxi driver, "What's the matter? Haven't you ever seen a woman before?" The taxi driver responds, "Oh, it's not the fact that you're that bothers me." "Then why are you looking at me that way?" "Well, ma'am, I'm looking at you and thinking, where the hell is this lady keeping the money to pay for this ride?" A blonde, a brunette, and a redhead are driving in a truck. On one cold, icy day, a blonde, brunette, and a redhead decide to take a drive. The brunette, as the best driver in icy conditions, decides to drive. The redhead decides to ride passenger because she keeps the best eye out. The blonde decides to ride in the bed of the truck because she's dressed for the weather. As they're coming over a bridge, they decide to roll their windows down and look at the water that has yet to ice completely over. Suddenly, in a moment of distraction, the brunette loses control and they drive off the bridge. After a minute, the brunette pops up out of the water and climbs up onto the bridge to look for her friends. As she's climbing up, the redhead pops up out of the water and climbs to the top of the bridge. Thankfully, since they rolled their windows down, they escaped easily and were able to swim up. They both wait patiently for what seems like way too long for someone to be able to breathe underwater and assume the worst of their blonde friend. Finally, the blonde pops up gasping for breath. When she gets atop the bridge to join her friends, they ask her what took so long. The blonde says, "Well, I couldn't get the tailgate open." A taxi driver was being interrogated after an accident. Police officer: "So how did you kill 59 people?" Taxi driver: "I was driving at 80 kilometers per h when I saw two men crossing the road. On the other side, a wedding was taking place. I hit the brakes, but they failed." Police officer: "And?" Taxi driver: "So I had to make the choice of either hitting the two men or the wedding party." Police officer: "You hit the two men, of course." Taxi driver: "Exactly. We think alike. Problem was, after hitting one of the men, the other escaped to the wedding party, so I went after him." Billy Bob wanted a job as a signalman on the railways. He was told to meet the inspector at the signal box. The inspector asked, "What would you do if you realized that two trains were heading for each other on the same track?" Billy Bob replied, "I would switch the points for one of the trains." "What if the lever broke?" asked the inspector. "Then I'd dash down out of the signal box," said Billy Bob, "and I'd use the manual lever over there." "What if that had been struck by lightning?" Then Billy Bob continued, "I'd run back into the signal box and phone the next signal box." "What if the phone was busy?" "Well, in that case," persevered Billy Bob, "I'd rush down out of the box and use the public emergency phone at the level crossing up there." "What if that was vandalized?" "Oh, well then, I'd run into town and go get my Uncle Lester." This puzzled the inspector, so he asked, "Why would you do that?" Billy Bob answered, "Well, Uncle Lester ain't never seen a train wreck." John was serving as a jury member in a high-profile gangster trial. The mob boss's underlings approached John with threats and a bribe. "There's no way a death sentence will be passed. At worst, it'll be a life sentence." Shaken, John agrees. The trial proceeds and the jury is sequestered. Hours turn into days, then a week. Finally, the jury returns with their decision: life imprisonment. The gang members are thrilled. The boss grins at John, and as his men hand John $10,000, they praise him. "Great job. You've truly earned this. But what took so long? Was it tough to persuade the others?" John sighs and says, "You wouldn't believe it. Right from the start, they were all set on acquittal. It was a nightmare convincing them for a life imprisonment." A husband and wife are going out for the evening. Before going out, they always put their cat out for the night. An Uber arrives to pick up the couple, and as they walk out of the house, the cat runs back inside. The husband goes back into the house to chase the cat out, and the wife walks out to the Uber. She doesn't want the driver to know that the house will be empty for the evening, so she explains to the driver, "My husband is just going upstairs to say goodbye to my mother." 10 minutes later, the husband comes out of the house with his hair a mess and his clothes disheveled. He climbs into the Uber with a huff. "Sorry I took so long," he sighs. "She was hiding under the bed, and I had to poke her with a coat hanger before I could get her to come out. She put up a fight, but I was finally able to grab her and throw her out the back door." A taxi driver speeds through a red light without even looking, and the passenger says, "Whoa, what are you doing? That was a red." The driver replies, "Don't worry about it. My cousin, he does it all the time." The passenger sits back until the driver blows through another red. He practically leaps out of his seat. "What are you doing? You'll get us killed." The driver waves him off. "Nonsense. My cousin, he does it all the time." Then they come to a green light, and the driver slams on the brakes and creeps into the intersection before taking off again. Now the passenger is livid. "What was that? That light was green. The driver nods and then shrugs before replying. Shh. $85 for an extraction, ma'am, was the dentist's reply. Oh, ye nae got anything cheaper, replies the Scottish lass, getting agitated. But that's the normal charge for an extraction, ma'am, replied the dentist. What about if you didn't use any anaesthetic? Asked Maggie hopefully. Well, it's highly unusual, ma'am, but if that's what you want, I suppose I can do it for $65. What about if you used one of your dentist trainees and still without anaesthetic? Asked the Scottish lass. Well, it's possible, but they are only training, and I can't guarantee their level of professionalism. It'll be a lot more painful, but I suppose in that case we can bring the price down to, say, $40. Ouch, that's still a bit much. How about if you make it a training session and have yon student do the extraction and the other students watching and learning? The dentist replied, Well, okay, it'll be good for the students. I suppose I'll charge you only $5 in that case, but it will be a traumatic experience. Now you're talking, laddie. It's a deal, said Maggie. Can you book the hubby in for next Wednesday? The whole family was seated around the table as the food was being served. The delicious aroma of Grandma's cooking filled the room, and little Logan couldn't wait to eat. As soon as his plate was set in front of him, he grabbed his fork and started digging in. Logan, wait until we say our prayer, his mom reminded him. Logan barely looked up, continuing to eat. I don't have to, he mumbled between bites. His mom raised an eyebrow. Of course you do. We always say a prayer before eating. Logan swallowed and shrugged. That's at our house, he said seriously. But this is Grandma's house. And she already knows how to cook. Laughter erupted around the table, and even Grandma chuckled as she ruffled Logan's hair. Well, she said with a twinkle in her eye, I guess that's the best compliment a cook can get. Still, Logan's dad cleared his throat and held out his hands. Nice try, buddy. We're still saying grace. Logan sighed, put down his fork and folded his hands. Fine, but I'm thanking God extra for Grandma's mashed potatoes. 2 Navy SEALs hopped on a quick flight from Dallas to Houston. One grabbed the window seat, the other took the middle. Right before takeoff, a Green Beret strolled on, plopped down in the aisle seat, kicked off his boots, and wiggled his toes, getting comfy. The SEAL by the window said, Man, I could go for a Coke. The Green Beret smiled. I got you, brother, and headed to grab one. As soon as he was gone, the SEAL picked up the Green Beret's boot and spit right in it. The Green Beret came back, handed over the Coke, and then the other SEAL said, You know what? That sounds good. I'll take one too. Once again, the Green Beret got up to fetch it. And, yep, you guessed it. The second SEAL grabbed the other boot and spit in it too. The flight continued, everyone relaxed, and soon they were landing in Houston. As the Green Beret slid his feet back into his boots, his face changed. He sighed deeply and shook his head. How long? He muttered. How long must this go on? This rivalry? This madness? This spitting in boots? And pissing in Cokes? Bob returned from a doctor's visit and told his wife Alma that the doctor said he only had 24 hours to live. Wiping away her tears, he asked her to make love with him. Of course she agreed, and they made passionate love. 6 hours later, Bob went to her again and said, Honey, now I only have 18 hours left to live. Maybe we could make love again. Alma agreed, and again they made love. Later, Bob was getting into bed when he realized he now had only 8 hours of life left. He touched Alma's shoulder and said, Honey, please, just one more time before I die. She agreed. Then afterwards she rolled over and fell asleep. Bob, however, heard the clock ticking in his head, and he tossed and turned until he was down to only 4 more hours. He tapped his wife on the shoulder to wake her up. "Honey, I only have 4 hours left. Could we—" His wife sat up abruptly, turned to him and said, "Listen, Bob, I have to get up in the morning for your funeral, and you don't have to get up." The local sheriff was hiring a deputy, so Gomer, who wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, decided to apply. Sheriff: "All right, Gomer, what's 1 and 1? Gomer: 11. The sheriff scratched his head. "Not what I expected, but technically right." Sheriff: "Which 2 days of the week start with K?" Gomer: "Today and tomorrow." The sheriff nodded. "Didn't see that coming, but can't argue with it." Sheriff: "All right, Gomer. Who killed Abraham Lincoln?" Gomer thought long and hard before saying, "I don't know." The sheriff sighed. "Well, go home and think on that one." Later at the pool hall, Gomer's buddies asked how it went. Gomer grinned. "It went great. First day on the job and I'm already working a murder case." Robert, 85, married Jenny, a lovely 25-year-old. Since her new husband is so old, Jenny decides that after their wedding, she and Robert should have separate bedrooms because she is concerned that her new but aged husband may overexert himself if they spend the entire night together. After the wedding festivities, Jen prepares herself for bed and the expected knock on the door. Sure enough, the knock comes, the door opens, and there is Robert, her 85-year-old groom, ready for action. They unite as one. All goes well, Robert takes leave of his bride, and she prepares to go to sleep. After a few minutes, Jenny hears another knock on her door, and it's Robert. Again, he is ready for more action. Somewhat surprised, Jenny consents for more coupling. When the newlyweds are done, Robert kisses his bride, bids her a fond good night, and leaves. Jenny is set to go to sleep again. But you guessed it, Robert is back again, rapping on the door, and is as fresh as a 25-year-old, ready for more action. Once more, they enjoy each other. But as Robert gets set to leave again, his young bride says to him, "I am thoroughly impressed that at your age you can perform so well and so often. I have been with guys less than a third of your age who were only good once. You are truly a great lover, Robert." Robert, somewhat embarrassed, turns to Jenny and says, "You mean I was here already?" Airman Jones was assigned to the induction center, where he briefed new recruits about their government benefits, especially GI insurance. Before long, Captain Smith noticed something unusual. Jones was selling insurance to almost every single recruit. Curious, the captain decided to observe one of his briefings. Jones started off explaining the basics of GI insurance, then dropped this gem. If you have GI insurance and go into battle and get killed, the government pays your family $200,000. If you don't have GI insurance and get killed, they only pay $6,000. Then, with a serious look, he asked, "Now, which group do you think they're going to send into battle first? Let's just say, he made a lot of sales that day." The Navy realized they had too many officers, so they came up with a special early retirement bonus. $1,000 for every inch measured in a straight line between any 2 points on their body. First officer steps up and says, "Measure me from the top of my head to my toes." Result? 6 feet equal sign. $72,000. Not bad. The second officer gets clever. Measure from my fingertips to my toes. Boom! 8 feet equal sign, $96,000. Even better. Then comes a grizzled old chief. When asked where he wants to be measured, he smirks and says, "From the tip of my weenie to my The pension officer tries to talk him out of it, but the chief insists. A medical officer arrives to take the measurement. The chief drops his pants, and the doc starts measuring. Then suddenly stops and says, Chief, where are your tests? The chief calmly replies, Vietnam. A guy named Bob dies and goes to hell. Before him stands the devil. Hello, Bob. Welcome to hell, the devil says. Now, there are 7 levels, and since your only sin was cheating on a science test in 3rd grade, you'll be moved to level 1 inch. "'Kay, that doesn't sound so bad," says Bob. "Level 1 is the hottest level because heat rises. You would know that if you studied for your science test, Bob." 2 Texas farmers, Jim and Bob, are sitting in a bar, enjoying beers. Jim turns to Bob and says, "You know what? I'm going to go to college." He then leaves the bar and makes his way over to the local college. He is met with the Dean of Administration, who is explaining to Jim what classes he is going to take. "All right, Jim, you are going to take 4 classes," the Dean says. "English, math, science, and logic." "Logic?" Jim asks. "What is that?" "Here, I'll give you an example. Do you own a weed whacker?" Proudly, Jim responded, "Yes, I do." "Well, if you own a weed whacker, then logically speaking you own a lawn," the Dean said. Yes, I do have a lawn." "Well, if you have a lawn, then logically speaking you own a house." Yes, I do have a house." "And if you have a house, then logically speaking you have a family." Yes, I do have a family." "And if you have a family, then logically speaking you have a wife. And if you have a wife, then logically speaking you're hetero." Yes, I do have a wife, and I am hetero." "Wow, I can't believe you found out all of that just because you knew I had a weed whacker," Jim exclaimed. "Yeah, that's what logic is," the Dean responded. Jim excitedly went back to the bar, awaited by Bob. "Bob, I'm taking 4 classes in college. English, math, science, and logic," Jim told Bob. "Logic?" Bob asks. "What is that?" "Here, I'll give you an example. Do you own a weed whacker?" "No." "Then you're gay." A woman, pregnant with twins, had a terrible accident and slipped into a coma. While she was unconscious, she gave birth. The problem? Her husband was out of town, so the only person available to name the babies was her not-so-bright brother. When she finally woke up, she panicked. "Oh no! What did he name them?" she called her brother in a hurry. Brother: "Good news! The first one was a girl." Mom: "Oh, thank goodness. What did you name her?" Brother: "Denise." Mom: "Oh, that's actually nice." "And the second baby?" Brother: "Oh, the second one was a boy." Mom: "And his name?" Brother: "Denephew." A man walks into a bar with a paper bag in his hand. He sits down and places the bag on the counter. The bartender walks up and asks, "What's in the bag?" The man reaches into the bag and pulls out a little man about 12 inches in height and sets him on the counter. He reaches back into the bag and pulls out a small piano, setting it on the counter as well. He reaches back into the bag again and pulls out a tiny piano bench. The little man sits at the piano and starts playing a beautiful piece by Mozart. "Where on earth did you get that?" asks the surprised bartender. The man responds by reaching into the paper bag once more. This time, he pulls out a magic lamp. He hands it to the bartender and says, "Here, rub it." So the bartender rubs the lamp, and suddenly there's a gust of smoke and a beautiful genie is standing before him. "I will grant you one wish, but just one." The bartender gets really excited and without hesitation says, "I want $1,000,000. A few moments later, a duck walks into the bar, then another duck, and another. Pretty soon, the entire bar is filled with ducks, and they keep coming. The bartender turns to the man and says, "You know, I think your genie is a little deaf. I asked for $1,000,000, not 1,000,000 ducks." The man replies, "Do you really think I asked for a 12-inch pianist?" A woman goes to her boyfriend's parents' house for Christmas dinner, her first time meeting the family. She's super nervous, but everything seems to be going well. Until the broccoli casserole kicks in, feeling the pressure, literally. She lets out a tiny, dainty fart. It's not loud, but it's definitely heard. Before she can panic, her boyfriend's dad glances under the table at their dog and says, "Skippy." Relieved, she grins. They think it's the dog. Perfect. A few minutes later, the pressure builds again. This time, she lets out a longer, louder one. The dad frowns at the dog. "Skippy." Now she's feeling bold. A few minutes later, she lets one rip that could wake the neighbors. The dad slams his fork down and yells, "Skippy, get away from her before she craps on you." I've lived a long life, but as I sit here in the twilight of my years, I'm struck by the strangest realization. I still have so many unanswered questions. Who let the dogs out? Seriously, who? I've had decades to ponder this, and I'm no closer to an answer. Where's the beef? I looked in the fridge, the freezer, and even that back corner of the pantry where forgotten snacks go to die. No beef. How do you get to Sesame Street? I've asked Siri, Alexa, and even that old GPS with the glitchy voice that always says recalculating. Still no luck. Why doesn't Dora just use Google Maps? If I can figure it out at my age, surely she can. Why are eggs cradled in flimsy paper, yet batteries are locked behind Fort Knox-level plastic? Did someone mix up their priorities? Why can't women apply mascara with their mouths closed? Is it a design flaw in humanity or mascara? And who decided abbreviated should be such a long word? It's almost ironic, isn't it? Why does lemon juice have artificial flavouring? But dish soap gets the real deal. Should we be cooking with dish soap instead? Why sterilise the needle for a lethal injection? I mean, what's the harm at that point? And this one bugs me to no end. Why does it cost 2 cents to share a thought, but you only get a penny for yours? Where's that missing penny? Is it going to fund some secret penny vault? Why do The Alphabet Song and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star share the same tune? Were the composers just lazy? Or was it a conspiracy to mess with our heads? Why did you just try to sing them both to check? Don't worry, I did it too. And Victoria's Secret? After all this time, I still don't know what she's hiding. Is it the missing beef? You're probably thinking I'm clever, but I must confess, I didn't come up with all this on my own. I borrowed it from a friend who got it from her brother's girlfriend's uncle's cousin's baby's godfather's barber. It's been passed down like an ancient scroll of unanswerable wisdom. So here I am, with a lifetime of pondering and no closer to the truth. Maybe the real secret of life isn't in finding the answers, but in reveling in the questions. An overweight man spends his evenings watching TV when one night a commercial catches his attention. A program guaranteeing a 10-pound weight loss in just 1 week. Intrigued, he decides to give it a shot. The next morning, he opens his door to find an incredibly beautiful woman wearing nothing but running shoes and a sign around her neck that reads, "If you can catch me, you can have me." Before he can process what's happening, she bolts. Motivated, the man chases her but fails to catch up. This continues every day for a week. By the end of it, he steps on the scale to find he's lost 10 pounds. Pleased with the results, he signs up for the next program, which promises a 15-pound weight loss in a week. The following morning, an even more stunning woman greets him under the same conditions. She takes off running, and he chases her with renewed determination. While he gets closer to catching her, she still eludes him. After another week of relentless pursuit, he's thrilled to see the scale reflecting a 15-pound drop. Encouraged by his success, he decides to try the ultimate program, which guarantees a 25-pound weight loss. However, before enrolling, he's required to sign a waiver and is warned about the extreme nature of the plan. He dismisses the caution and signs up anyway. The next morning, he opens his door to a startling sight: a towering 300-pound bodybuilder wearing nothing but running shoes, sporting a fierce expression and a sign around his neck that reads, "If I catch you, you're mine." Terrified, the man sprints like never before. For the entire week, he runs with every ounce of energy he has. By the end of the program, he doesn't just lose the promised 25 pounds, he sheds 34. An elderly couple was settling into bed when the husband suddenly let out a loud fart and proudly declared, 7 points. His wife, confused, turned to him and asked, "What on earth are you talking about?" With a mischievous grin, he replied, "It's fart football." Not one to back down from a challenge, the wife waited a moment before letting one rip. Smiling triumphantly, she declared, "Touchdown! Tie game!" A few minutes later, the husband responded with another loud one. "Aha, 14-7. I'm back in the lead." Determined to keep pace, the wife let loose another big one and exclaimed, "Touchdown! Tie game again!" Then, with a sly smile, she followed it up with a small squeaker and added, "Field goal! I'm leading 17-14. Feeling the heat, the husband pushed hard to reclaim his lead. But in his eagerness, disaster struck. He accidentally pooped in the bed. His wife, horrified, shouted, "What did you just do?" Sighing in defeat, the husband muttered, "Half-time. Time to switch sides." Bonus joke: the Christmas scheme. Over the phone, a son was stunned when his father announced, "We can't stand each other anymore. Your mother and I are getting divorced after 40 years. Call your sister and tell her." With that, the father hung up. Panicking, the son immediately called his sister and relayed the shocking news. "Like hell they're divorcing," she snapped. "Stay on the line. I'm calling Dad." She dialed her father, furious. "You're not getting divorced. Don't do another thing until we get there. My brother and I are flying home tomorrow. Do you hear me?" She slammed the phone down. The old man turned to his wife, a smug grin on his face. "Well," he said, "they're both coming for Christmas, and this time they're paying for their own tickets."